The Russian economy is in the shit right now. They have a lot of problems. One problem is a problem of labor. There's a labor shortage in Russia. It's widely discussed, and they've tried to find solutions to it. One method has been trying to get North Korean laborers, foreign student visa programs to get people to come over, a lot of foreign laborers, but there's also restrictions on that because it's not particularly popular to bring in tons and tons of workers from Central Asia to places like Moscow when it comes to a lot of Putin's voting base. So they've been pretty hesitant to, let's say, open the doors to try to fill those shortages. So that's one problem. Another problem that the Russian economy has is that they have kind of had the public banking sector bankroll the government, but eventually that bankroll isn't endless. It's not like you just can't endlessly like hack away at the banking sector. There's a question about the reserves loosening, which is they have less of them than they used to. The Russian economy used to be known for running surpluses quite constantly, but as now they're running deeper and deeper into deficit spending, they've had to ask difficult questions about cutting social services or increasing large amounts of debt. And right now, there's a question on whether or not they're going to increase taxes or cut social services, with a VAT tax increase after Putin promised never to increase taxes because of the war being considered, as is being reported by multiple sources from inside decision-making rooms. So they're considering more taxes. They're facing the possibility of social cuts if they don't go through with those taxes. They're facing the problems with the labor shortage. They're facing problems with market access, of course, from sanctions and sanctions tightening. They're facing problems when it comes to the markets that they can export to, as are losing more and more ground in Europe as they continue to wean off. We used to export 40% of their product to Europe. Now it's 19. That could continue to go down depending upon European action, but it looks like it's still headed in that direction. There hasn't been any really headway on the Trans-Siberian Railway 2 electric boogaloo that the Russians and the Chinese have talked about so much, and that's mostly due to disagreements between the Russians and the Chinese. The Chinese understand that the Russians have less leverage in the situation. They don't have as many consumers, and it's not just a question about having consumers. I mean, yeah, you could put crude in a barrel and hunk it onto a ship, especially if you're still utilizing your shadow fleet. But having pipelines is going to make it a lot cheaper. And the Chinese, understanding the Russian position, believe it should be the Russians that put the infrastructure in place. The Russians, understanding their position, want it to be the Chinese. Not to mention the fact of the massive aerial campaign, as was discussed by the Russian state press, as they can no longer hide it, against Russian oil refineries. Reuters says it was 17% disabled. That was months ago. Next update was 20% from the United States. I would not be surprised if it's past 20%. I don't know if it's somewhere like 25%, which would be quite substantial. But a lot of people have been saying that once you get to 30%, you're reaching a real sweet spot for national crisis. And considering that Russian refineries have not yet found a solution for the long-range drone war, they're kind of up shit creek without a paddle in the moment. They do have air defense systems, but Russia's greatest advantage has been its size, breadth of population, and resources, which is now, for its air campaign, its biggest weakness. In order to cover those many refineries, in order to cover that much infrastructure, in order to cover that much territory, you need a supply of air defense munitions they just do not have. And if they did try to produce it, where would they have to take those air defense systems from? Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, where they're already constantly burning through them as the Ukrainians hunt them down, in locations like Crimea, where they're finding new tactics like putting drones on top of these Sea Baby naval UAVs that then launch off from the shoreline and then hammer the radar systems and air defense infrastructure along the Crimean coastline. And those, if you want Crimea protected, you have to resupply those radar systems. You have to resupply those air defense systems. And they don't have an endless supply of that. That's not even to talk about the targeting of their radar aircraft. So Russia's biggest advantage becomes its biggest weakness when it comes to defending their airspace. I mean, sure, they could choose to redirect all of their air defense systems to protect these refineries, but then what does Ukraine do? Okay, fine, we'll target your Shahed production factories. We'll target where you produce the artillery shells. Okay, we'll target your export ports. We'll target other nodes in the production. Hell, maybe you can produce the refined good, but we'll make sure you goddamn well can't export it. So this is a problem that's only going to grow with ferocity. The Ukrainians have every intent and purpose to continue to invest in the long-range drone program. And not only do the Ukrainians have every intention to continue to invest in the long-range drone program, we have seen public signals from the American government that they are supportive of the long-range drone program. I mean, it was months ago that Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky had a talk about, hey, you know, what do we do? What do we do about bringing Russia to the table? And Trump said, bring the war to them. How did he want the war to be brought to them? Well, through the long-range drone program, and that is what Zelensky has done. Now, there has been some hiccups in the way. Of course, Trump being Trump and the way he flip-flops, and his mood depends on what side he wakes up in the bed in the morning. These drones was a problem for the Hungarians when they lost that one import node. Trump condemned that. But besides that, you haven't got much condemnation from Trump on the long-range drone program. Every once in a while, when somebody talked about a Russian escalation, you'd hear something along the lines of, well, the Ukrainians are doing that, the very thing they want them to do. And that was pretty ridiculous. But right now, as we speak, word is that Donald Trump is considering sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. That is something that the Biden administration did not do. That is something the Biden administration did not approve and did not give the Ukrainians. If they were able to get the Tomahawk missile from Trump, now these are expensive pieces of equipment. So who's going to finance it? Is it going to be the Ukrainians that buy it directly? Or is it going to be the Europeans that buy it? Because we know it's not coming in no aid package. Trump has made that clear. We talked about this well before he got inaugurated, that if he did get in there, the only way you're going to get weapons to Ukraine is through selling it. And it seems to be the case. Is it going to be the Europeans that purchase it? Or is it going to be the Ukrainians that purchase it? Ultimately, it doesn't matter as long as they can purchase it. Now, this question has been asked a few times and has been asked of a few people. Both J.D. Vance, Keith Kellogg, and right now they're pretty indecisive. But it seems to be that they're signaling openly that Donald Trump is considering giving these munitions. I want to give you an example of the type of rhetoric we're getting from people. So there's two people, J.D. Vance and there's Keith Kellogg. Let's start with Keith Kellogg. Now, Keith Kellogg, he was probably the one in the administration who was most pro-Ukraine. And that's saying something, considering at one point when the aid freeze went into effect, never saw no new tariffs implemented on the Russians or any new consequences for the Russians not engaging in negotiations in good faith. But when the Ukrainians had that aid freeze to try to indicate that, you know, they better be willing to give some stuff up, Keith Kellogg went out there and said that the Ukrainians had to be beaten into submission like a barnyard animal. Hit with a 2x4 like a mule was the exact quote. And that's what this was. The 2x4 was the freeze. Now, there's still speculation about how much of an effect that had on the Kursk excursion. Definitely when it comes to the intelligence freeze. I'm still not convinced that that was really what caused them to get pushed out. I think it might have been an inciting incident for the offensive, but there was a lot of structural problems in Kursk for anybody who, you know, talked to soldiers who work in that area, talked to officers who worked in that area, or read extensive reporting on it outside of what is just repeated by Ukrainian or other commanders. But it did show that they were willing to bring those types of consequences down, and Keith Kellogg was willing to defend it in public. Now Keith Kellogg is going out there and doing two things. Number one, covering for Trump politically, saying this is Biden's war. He didn't want this. This is Biden's war. He didn't want this. But also saying very clearly in response to a question about these Tomahawks and longer range strikes into Russia, you know, things are happening. Things are happening, long range strikes, ability to hit deep.
Russia overnight launching a massive drone strike on Kyiv. This after Ukrainian President Zelensky announced a $90 billion arms agreement with the U.S. as President Trump appeared to reverse his position on Ukraine's chances of turning the tide in this 3.5-year war. For the latest, let's bring in Special Envoy for Ukraine, General Keith Kellogg. General, thank you for joining us this morning. I want to go First, to the president's post on Truth Social, it really stunned the world. He said, with time, patience, the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started, very much an option. Why not? Ukraine would be able to take back their country in its original form, and who knows, maybe even go further than that. That last line, maybe go further than that. Are we talking about long-range strikes into Russia soon?
Yeah, first of all, Jackie, thanks for having me, and congratulations on the new program. It's really great. Look, one predicate.
By the way, when he said that, he looked at the floor. I'm not saying that means necessarily anything, but I noticed it.
Before we start, you know, this war actually started in 2014 under President Obama when the Russians went into Crimea, and then 2022 when they went in under President Biden. This is not President Trump's war in the sense he has inherited this war, and he's done everything he possibly can do to bring this war to a conclusion, from talking to two major principals to talking to allies, and he's done a wonderful job doing it, but he's really trying really hard. His comments this week that came after UN General Assembly were, and you said kind of changed the landscape. He's always been very, very positive about trying to get to a conclusion, but I think what's happened is the constant information he gets, which is really good, from the intelligence agencies, from Secretary of State, all the way down the line, kind of shows him that Russia is not winning this war. If they were winning this war, they'd be in Kyiv, they'd be in Odessa, they'd be over the Dnieper River. That we added 2 new NATO allies. One of them, you know, Finland had doubled the size of the border the Russians have to protect. We added Sweden, which is a technologically advanced nation, especially when it comes to armament. So this is where I think they have an opportunity to challenge Russia much more aggressively if they pick to do it, and they get the weapon systems to do so. They've never asked for U.S. troops. They don't want U.S. troops on the ground. But what they do want is the armament and the ability and the authority to use it. And if they do that, I think it's going to be pretty well received.
Do they have the authority to use it?
Well, it's mixed. Sometimes they get some of the authority, sometimes they don't, and I think very carefully everybody should follow what the president says. He's the commander-in-chief by the Constitution, and everybody falls in line. When the president says go left, you go left. If he says you go right, you go right. That's the president. The last I checked, you know, none of us got electoral college votes. He did. So when the president says to do something, we just need to to do that and complete the action. Look, I think everybody needs to understand the seriousness of this war. This war is the largest war in Europe since the end of World War II. It's between the two geographically largest countries in Europe, with Ukraine and Russia. The casualties are well over 1 million. We're talking hundreds of thousands. They're using the most advanced systems in the world, bombers, missiles, the drone technology. It's really advanced, and sometimes I think we don't realize how serious this is. And my biggest concern is that a mistake can happen, and that causes for a larger escalation, be it the attacks by the drones into Poland or the aircraft that are overflying Estonia, whatever it's going to be. You have to be very, very careful about it. And when I was up at the UN this last week, I talked to the National Security Advisor for the Japanese, Masataka Okano, and he said, hey, by the way, make sure you understand this is internationalized.
Yeah. And
what he meant by that is, he said, in our neck of the woods, the Chinese are being very, very aggressive about it, as are the North Koreans. So this is just not only a European issue. This is a global issue, and I think sometimes we forget that, and we should react accordingly.
I just want to clarify. Are you saying, though, that it is the president's position that Ukraine can conduct long-range strikes into Russia, that has been authorized by the president?
This is the thing. When they say this, I don't know why she's asking it like this. This is the one problem with this interview. The question shouldn't be, can they do it? They already do it. They do it with drones every day. The question is whether or not they're going to use American components in either French, British, or American weapons in order to do the same thing more effectively, therefore speeding up the decline of the Russian refinery. Let's just say the refinery family tree.
I think reading what he has said and reading what Vice President Vance has said, as well as Secretary Rubio, the answer is yes. Use the ability to hit deep. There are no such things as sanctuaries. That's one of the reasons I believe that this last week, and it has been confirmed, that President Zelensky asked President Trump to get Tomahawk missiles, which give you a depth. They're really good systems. America makes the best systems in the world.
Are we giving him the Tomahawks?
Well, that decision has not been made, but he's asked. I know that President Zelensky did, in fact, ask for them, which was confirmed by a social media post by Vice President Vance. That's going to be up to the president to do it.
Okay.
Zelensky asked for them. It's up to the president to do it. So it's still a big question mark as to whether or not they're going to get those Tomahawks. But you can hear Keith Kellogg's framing. You can see as they're making that slow transition from, you know, forever war, Biden war, forever war, Biden war too. Well, Biden war, but I mean, like, we did what we needed to do, and we need to figure out a way to move forward, XYZ, XYZ. Here is, I think, though, probably one of the most fascinating shifts to watch, and that is J.D. Vance. See, he, from the very beginning, was not in favor of helping Ukraine at all. In fact, on the campaign trail for the Senate, he said when the invasion started, I do not care about Ukraine. I don't care if it goes one way or the other. And this was as, you know, the massacre of Bucha and all these atrocities were coming out. His position was, I do not care. Now, immediately afterwards, within 24 hours, because in Ohio, there's actually a significant Ukrainian community, his campaign released a statement because they were trying to beat Tim Ryan for Senate. Oh, wait, no, we do care. We do care. We do care. You know, maybe people have misconstrued what we meant to say. Then he won, and then he went back not to carry. And since he's been in office, his position has been, it's not our issue. It's Europe's issue. And he doesn't particularly sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause at all. He wants to completely pivot away and concentrate on the home front, or at least that's the idea. So our commitments, our promises, and the future of European security is not the future of American security. If we lose that share of the market share, well, you know, that's tough for the American producers. If we lose stability in Europe, even though that's brought us into war multiple times, I mean, that's something I guess we could just look the other way of this time, irrespective of the fact that we could always end up in another administration that thinks differently and then brings us into a war. Point is, he just doesn't think it's necessary either to uphold what we promised to with the atomic standard, keep our commitments morally or strategically. He just does not really care. Then Trump said, Ukraine original borders, Russia's losing, and Ukraine can win. And after making those statements, and now that the Ukrainian government is in active talks to get Tomahawk missiles, which, if approved, could cause some devastation. Now, mind you, imagine if they got the Tomahawks and then Trump decided to get a little flimsy on it. For example, fine, we'll give you the Tomahawks, but you can't use them in Russia, which is the entire purpose that they want the Tomahawks for. I could imagine some amount of kind of weak approach. Like, either if you're going to approach trying to bring the war to a close, you got to really approach it. You can't just take baby steps and have an even slower version of the Biden slow roll, because that's what we're at. We're in a very slow version. We're 9 months in. We're still waiting the first step, the first baby step. But if they do get those Tomahawks and they can be sent deep into Russia, that can cause some damage. And as Trump is having these conversations with Zelensky's government, as they're talking about, Zelensky's talking about a big weapons deal that he wants to do with the United States. I want to see if we can pull this up from Zelensky. Here it is. Zelensky says mega deal and works for U.S. arms purchases. I mean, this would be something that would be quite substantial in moving the war if they could get these weapons to them at a speed that is suitable for their immediate need. Zelensky says mega deal and works for U.S. arms purchases. The package under discussion is reportedly worth an estimated $90 billion. Mind you, this would be bigger than any aid package ever given to Ukraine, either the $60 billion aid package from the United States or the $24 billion. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Saturday said Kyiv is working on a mega deal for weapons purchases from the United States. Now, I'm talking about total value, dollar value. Of course, if it's dollar value and it's some jets, but it doesn't include artillery shells, there can be questions about, you know, impact. And of course, America produces weapons pretty expensively, still very sizable. At a press briefing in Kyiv, Zelensky said Ukraine had provided detailed specifications of its military needs to U.S. President Donald Trump, including requests for long-range weapon systems. We discussed and agreed on the main points with the president. Now we are moving on practical implementation. The package under discussion is estimated to be worth $90 billion. According to the media reports, Ukrainian officials will visit the U.S. later this month in October. Well, that's not later this month, is it? Later this month, or in October, for technical talks on the arms purchases and a separate drone production deal. Separately, by the way, if they could start drone production in the United States, you can see how that would be of use both to the United States and Ukraine. Separately, or they could sponsor it in Ukraine and get more bang for their buck, as the regulations are lower and they can run those 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Not to mention, you have all the specialists right there. Separately, Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia will meet with officials in the U.S. next month on potential American projects in Ukraine as part of its joint investment fund agreed on last spring, according to Bloomberg. Zelensky, who met with Trump last week in New York on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, said on Saturday that he had shared with the U.S. president a certain vision of what could be done to respond to Russia's actions in the war on Ukraine. As for what Ukraine wants from the United States of America, it's all there, Zelensky was quoted as saying. We delivered to the U.S. president a request containing details and illustrations of what Ukraine wants. But we are prepared for separate agreements, for individual types of weapons, including long-range systems. I cannot provide more details. Well, obviously now we've heard about the missiles, the cruise missiles. So this is the situation that JD Vance is in. He's having to go from, I don't care, this is a waste of money, we're barreling towards World War III, to Ukraine can win. Oh, and he also called it a lost cause multiple times. Do you want to know how many times he called this a lost cause? I cannot count on my hands, both of them, how many times he's called this a lost cause. And he's went out in public and argued again and again and again how Ukraine cannot win. Now Trump is contradicting him, saying, I looked at the facts and Ukraine can win. So I guess JD Vance was wrong, if we're listening to Trump. And he has to go out there and possibly get ready to defend a $90 billion, the largest ever weapons package for Ukraine. It won't be an aid bill, and that'll be the one saving grace that is going to be saving his ass. If it was an aid bill, oh my God, I imagine he would be green having to make that speech and end it with Slava Ukraini. But currently, this is what we're getting.
Now to Ukraine. Look, I've answered a version of this question probably 100 times over the past 3 months. And one of the things I'll say about the president is that he is responsive to the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is that, number one, we have engaged in incredibly good faith negotiations with both the Russians and the Ukrainians. And I believe the president is growing incredibly impatient with the Russians right now because he doesn't feel like they're putting enough on the table to end the war. That's number one. Number two, the president has grown very confident that this war is bad for Russia. You hear me say this all the time. You hear the president say this all the time. The war is bad for Russia. It's
So he's saying it's bad for Russia.
bad for Ukraine.
It's bad for Ukraine, yeah. He said that before. That's not at all that Trump said. He won't go out there and defend that Ukraine can win. He's being very careful not to do that. He knows he'll upset his certain base if he says that. Because Vance's base is a little different than Trump's base.
It's bad for America. We want the killing to stop. That remains the president's position. But the president also can look at reality on the ground. He sees the economic numbers that are coming out of Eastern Europe. He sees the number of dead people, both Russians and Ukrainians, that are happening in that war. And the president is telling Vladimir Putin it is time to stop the killing. He would say that to Zelensky. In fact, has said that to Zelensky. He wants this war to end, and he's doing everything that he can to stop it. But look, if the Russians refuse to negotiate in good faith, I think it's going to be very, very bad for their country. That's what the president made clear. It's not a shift in position. It's an acknowledgement of the reality on the ground. We're going to keep on fighting.
If the reality on the ground shifts your position, that's still a shift of position.
For peace every single day in the Trump administration.
So that's one thing. That was a few weeks ago. Here is his most recent statements within 48 hours of what he had to say about Russia and Ukraine. And I saw Michael Tracy, who I debated on support for Ukraine a long time ago, who told me that if the Russians were literally rounding up the Ukrainians and executing them like a mass genocidal campaign of just anybody who shows any sign of Ukrainian, eliminate, his solution to that would be surrender. That was his. So this is somebody who under no circumstances would ever support Ukraine. He was not happy with this interview.
Isn't it in the best interest of the United States of America to stand by Ukraine and prevent Russia from gaining any ground in the Eastern Bloc, which doesn't end in Ukraine?
Yes. Good talk. Thank you for the $10. Yes, I believe it is. I believe it is within America's interest for Ukraine to end this war in the strongest position possible with Europe security largely secured, as it has been our most dependable ally and is one of our biggest consumer bases, if not our biggest consumer base. And not to mention, if we want to engage in any type of diplomacy, aggressively with China in reference to trade or other issues, having the Europeans, with us would be useful instead of, telling them going through economic difficulties, just piss off the Chinese. I'm sure that won't economically be difficult for you. Anyway, yes, I do believe that. Here is J.D. Vance. Here's the interview that made some Russia simps and peaceniks not too happy.
Your attention, if I may, to Ukraine and Russia. This week, obviously, the United Nations General Assembly. And on the sidelines of that, President Trump made a statement, very strong statement.
Russia should have stopped it, but the other side can fight too. And they've proven that. Maybe it could be that Russia is a paper tiger.
Were you surprised by this? He also said, I should add a very important part, that he thought Ukraine will get all the territory back, because for some time we heard that Ukraine was going to have to give up some of the territory that they lost in this war. So were you surprised by this statement, and what changed?
This is a better question than I think than Keith Kellogg got asked. Definitely considering J.D. Vance's previous statements on this.
No, I wasn't surprised at all, Martha. And one of the things I really...
Come on! Wasn't surprised at all that I said, you know what? Maybe we'll go even further than that. Was that a reference to Crimea? Is that a reference to XYZ? He wasn't surprised at all when he said it was a complete lost cause just months before and defending why they aren't doing anything? Never surprised. J.D. Vance is surprised by nothing. He sees everything. He has future vision. Hell, I was surprised by it. Come on.
admire about the president's approach to this entire conflict, and frankly all the diplomatic efforts of the administration, is that it's very grounded in reality and what's happening on the ground. If you go back to the last days of the Biden administration, if you go back to even a couple of months ago, the Russians were conquering large amounts of territory. Every month they were gaining another couple hundred square kilometers, maybe more than that. And what's happening right now, as the president articulated, is Russia's really stalled. They're killing a lot of people. They themselves are losing a lot of people, and they don't have much territorial gain to show for it. And so the president is looking at the situation. He's saying, look, the Russian economy is in shambles. The Russians are not gaining much on the battlefield. It's clearly time for them to listen to his passionate plea for them to come to the table and actually talk seriously about peace. So you ask what's changed. I think what's changed is the reality on the ground, where the Russians are killing a lot of people. They're losing a lot of people. They don't have much to show for it. We remain.
How did any of those? No, I'm sorry. I reject this premise completely. How was that changed? 9 months ago, they weren't killing a lot of people. They weren't shooting a lot of people. They weren't looting. Like all these like different things. They weren't doing all the things that you're talking about now. Like all the things he's saying was something they were doing 9 months ago. They were doing a year ago. They were doing 2 years ago. Like the only difference is now we wasted 9 months of possible action.
Committed to peace, but it takes two to tango. And unfortunately, what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, the Russians have refused to sit down with any bilateral meetings with the Ukrainians. They've refused to sit down with any trilateral meetings where the president or some other member of the administration could sit down with the Russians and the Ukrainians. So our view is we want peace here. We've been actively pursuing peace from the very beginning of the administration, but the Russians have got to wake up and accept reality here. A lot of people are dying. They don't have a lot to show for it. How many more people are they willing to lose? How many more people are they willing to kill for very little, if any, gain in the military advantage on the ground there? I think the answer is hopefully not that much, but certainly our attitude here is we're going to keep on working for peace, and we hope the Russians actually wake up to the reality on the ground.
Well, I think the feeling was at the Alaska meeting that the Russians were going to come to the table in a meaningful way. We've seen that they have only stepped up their attacks since then, and now we do hear a very different tune from President Trump. Just quickly, here's what Volodymyr Zelensky's response was when Brett said, "Were you surprised by this?" Watch.
Are you surprised to hear that?
A little bit. A little bit. It was a little bit surprise for me. You're right. I was very positive signals from the side that Trump and America will be with us to the end of the war. Yes, we will see. Brett, we will see, but God bless.
So, Vice President Vance, now Zelensky is requesting that the United States sell Tomahawk missiles towards this effort to European nations. They go 1,000 miles. They have.
Remember this. The war is going to escalate. Trump said on the campaign trail, I can't believe Biden approved these long-range strikes. That's a horrible escalation. We're barreling towards World War III. J.D. Vance like, oh, Queen. Oh, sir, please read Mr. Mearsheimer, sir. Oh, please meet Mr. Elbridge Colby. He's got some brilliant ideas, sir. Oh, please. 9 months later, oh, Tomahawks. That farther than any missile we've given you yet, you say. More than double the length than any missile we've given Ukraine yet, you say. Okay, sure, we'll think about it. Could we put that next to the $90 billion arms deal that's larger than any aid package ever given to Ukraine? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, let's discuss that. Yeah, let's discuss that. Also, I think Ukraine can get its original borders back and maybe more. It's just such to be like our position hasn't shifted at all. They ran into a brick wall. And if your strategy was to keep running into a brick wall over and over and over again, eventually you had, okay, we have to try something different. And so that's what happened is it became undeniable that there was no real pathway diplomatically forward with the Russians. And the Russians, if this ends here, delayed American action for 9 months, nearly an entire year. Now, I remember 3-4 months in, people say, oh, it's not that long. For them, 3-4 months may not be that long. Talking to some streamers, people on this platform, oh, it's only been 6 months. 6 months? You go stay in a trench for 6 months. It's been 9 months now. Is somebody going to really tell me in 3 months, a year isn't that long? That's more. 9 months is a full deployment in Afghanistan. Nobody can tell me a full deployment is not a long time.
Moscow in their guided missile range. This is something that the United States has rejected. The president has rejected in requests in the past, but now President Trump has said to Zelensky, quote, we'll work on it. Do you support that?
Well, right now, as the president said, Martha, we're looking at it. We're certainly looking at a number of requests from the Europeans. And one of the things, again, that I think has really worked about the president's policy in Ukraine and Russia is that it's forced the Europeans to step up in a big way. So as you know, Martha, we're no longer just giving tons of money and weapons. What we're doing is asking the Europeans to buy that weaponry. That shows some European skin in the game. I think that gets them really invested in both what's happening in their own backyard, but also
they were already invested. It's in their backyard. Look, it's a question about how much of the bill that they should carry. And I agree that that's a real conversation to be had. But for much of this action, when we talk about saying we're going to sanction you, never mind. We're going to sanction you. Never mind. We're going to sanction you. And you draw red lines and then don't do it. This isn't a question about getting the Europeans to get their skin in the game. This is a question about at a certain point, people looking at you and asking if you can pull the trigger. And at this point, the Russians are questioning whether you can pull the trigger, period. The Russians have not seen Trump pull the trigger once after threatening to pull the trigger multiple times. At least 7 deadlines have been come and gone. 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 month. At this point, we just need to buy yearly packages of excuses and just get it all done and over with. In a year, we're going to say, your excuses still full of it? Absolutely still full of it. Okay, see you next year. Instead of doing this like pitter patter, back and forth patty cake diplomatically. So, I mean, yeah, you want the Europeans more invested, but I mean, they were ready to engage in more sanctions packages, and it was Trump that dragged his feet the whole time, when really the only concrete constant threat of retaliations towards the Russians that he continued on the campaign trail, as he was hesitant to dedicate any more weapons packages or dedicate any, even really dedicate weapon sales, was sanctions. 300% is what he said on the campaign trail. 300% secondary tariffs, secondary sanctions. We haven't even gotten 1%.
Also in the peace process that the president has been pushing for the last 8 months. So we're going to keep on working on all of this stuff. But our simple message right now, the Russians are not gaining a lot. This war is terrible for their economy. And they have to ask themselves, how many more people are they willing to lose? And how many more people are they willing to kill for very little military advantage?
But would you be okay with them having Tomahawk missiles and the threat that that would pose and the possible escalation it would pose? Because there was a time when you were very much in favor of, backing away from this situation in terms of our support of Ukraine.
Well, one of the things I've always said, Martha, is I wanted the Europeans to step up in a big way. I wanted us, the United States, to stop shoveling money and weaponry to a conflict that was so far away, when I felt like the Europeans, with all due respect,
1 second, I want to hear that question again.
advantage.
But would you be okay with them having Tomahawk missiles and the threat that that would pose and the
I just need to hear it again.
possible escalation it would pose? Because there was a time when you were very much in favor of, backing away from this situation in terms of our support of Ukraine.
Well, you see, that was before Trump told me what to believe.
Well, one of the things I've always said, Martha, is I wanted the Europeans to step up in a big way. I wanted us, the United States, to stop shoveling money and weaponry to a conflict that was so far away.
But now we're about to shovel $90 billion, more than Biden, in weaponry over to a foreign country. If it's even being discussed at this point, I mean, that says something, right? That this was never really all that tied to the ground, anchored, so to speak.
When I felt like the Europeans, with all due respect for them, were not actually taking their fair share of the burden. Because of the president's leadership, you now have the Europeans buying weaponry from the United States as opposed to us giving it. And you asked this question about Tomahawks. It's something the president's going to make the final determination on. What the president is going to do is what's in the best interest of the United States of America. That's the driving light between his foreign policy decisions, between his defense policy decisions, and that will be the same heuristic that we apply to how we answer this question about Tomahawks. I'll let the president speak to it, but I know that we're having conversations this very minute about that issue.
Okay, I want to squeeze in two more here. The first one is TikTok. This deal, the parameters are being announced. We're learning more of it as of yesterday.
Okay, so do you see pain through that smile? That's my first question, and I'll leave that for everybody at home to decide. You can leave a comment or something in chat. If you're live, comment if you're looking at the YouTube video afterwards. Do you see pain in that smile when he has to say these things about, it's the Russians and it's, the situation's changed. I mean, Russia really, can't really win. This type of rhetorical shift, I do think, is going to be slightly difficult for him. But he did it as good as I would imagine. I think he did it as good as he could do it. He did the rhetorical shift. He did it. Keith Kellogg did it. Marco Rubio won't have to do it as much, but he'll do it, I imagine, to some extent. I don't think it'll be that long before we see Caroline Leavitt giving her orders. She'll do it as well. And, of course, Trump himself, the most important factor, he's done it. So we've seen the rhetorical shift. We've seen it not only through Trump, but now it's seeped through the entire administration, sending a clear, open signal to the Russians. And if this is diplomacy, if this is attached to the world, actually, this isn't just Trump in some flagrant, in the moment, just la-di-da, he stumbled into it and he's going to stumble out of the position overnight. If there's any thought placed into it, the way I imagine it's being considered is we are about to signal to the Russians openly about our willingness to send Ukraine the gear that we threatened to on the campaign trail. Maybe not the 300% secondary tariffs that Trump's going to be worried about the economic effects on his own country, but maybe a $90 billion weapons sale that certainly isn't going to hurt the American economy, but maybe a long-range Tomahawk deal that is going to hurt Russian oil refineries, not American energy manufacturing. Hell, Europe needs more American LNG, especially if that 19% still that's being exported of Russia's energy exports to Europe goes down to 10 or lower or evaporates entirely in the years to come. So I think that the way that this is probably going to go is Trump is going to signal this $90 billion deal, maybe. Going to signal the Tomahawk deal, maybe. They might even start talking about sanctions again. I know they did 7 deadlines. I know after every single deadline, to expect a result at this point might be some form of self-harm that maybe should be TOS approached. Maybe my channel should be taken down for what I'm showing in this type of self-harm. But if there was some actual thought put into it, it would make sense that you send these public signals, wait, see how the Russians respond, and then act accordingly. And you want to know what? We actually do have an idea of how the Russians will respond, because the Russians did respond. It was actually Dmitry Peskov who responded. Let's see if I can bring up the message here. Here it is. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, and I quote, "Even if the U.S. will supply Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles, it will not change anything on the battlefield." Well, the cruise missiles would be targeted probably towards production facilities, drone production, cruise missile production, ammunition production, maybe any type of repair factories for military vehicles, and of course, energy production, refineries of some sort. So when he says this, what is this supposed to signal? Is it supposed to be chest beating? Sign of strength? Maybe. You know what else it could be? Setting up that if Trump does send the cruise missile, they'll be able to say it was not that big of a deal, so they don't have to escalate in large part in comparison, i.e. do something aggressive to the United States that they might be fearful could push Trump to just do even more. They say Trump is a guy who shoots from the hip, which might not always be true, but is sometimes true, depending on which day he wakes up and, what side of the bed he wakes up. So when that day comes, if he makes that approval, what will the Russians do? Well, they've set themselves out. Well, they've set themselves up so they don't really have to do much except wait and see. And maybe extend that suspension of gas exports into 2026. Did Steve Rosenberg release any more media reviews that I didn't see?